Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up daily news analysis of the Hindu newspaper dated 30th of July 2022. The article which we shall cover today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion.
So the first article which we have taken up for discussion has appeared on page number 6. Parliament paralyzed as parties step up attack. So both the houses of parliament had to be adjourned yesterday as the Congress-led opposition and BJP hardened their positions over the face-off between Sonia Gandhi and Smriti Irani over Congress leader Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary's remark on President Draupadi Murmu. And this disruption of the parliament is not new. Whenever there is an ongoing session of parliament, the news which we most often read about proceedings of parliament is about adjournments, it's about disruption, it's about how MPs are not functioning and performing the role they are envisaged to be according to the Constitution of India and the customs and traditions of Indian Parliament. Then you have another similar news on page number 1. Kerala tops in holding assembly sittings in 2021. The state has been very impressive as far as the legislative work is concerned. And if you consider the graph where the chart shows the state assemblies which sat for more than 20 sessions in 2021, Kerala recorded the most such sitting last year, followed by Odisha and Karnataka. And you can see the legislative work on an average in the year stands at around 24 to 26 in Rajasthan, Jharkhand, Assam, Gujarat. Both of which point towards a very important line in the syllabus of GS paper 2, which is about parliament and state legislatures, their structure, their functioning and issues arising out of those. It also talks about conduct of business, powers and privileges. But here it is important for us to take up the functioning of legislatures and parliament. And what we can see that in past 50 years, there is a sharp decline in the productivity of the parliament. Parliamentary productivity means not only the quantitative assignment of number of days they are meeting in a particular year, but also on the qualitative benchmark as to how much of the time was allocated for debate, how many of the bills were taken up for real discussion, how much of the percentage of the budget which was voted upon was actually discussed, how many bills were actually grilled in front of a parliamentary committee. All these talk about productivity, whether the parliament is able to play the role it was envisaged or not, which is basically holding the executive accountable, legislative work and providing representation of the people. So in the ensuing discussion we are going to look into these matters. We are also going to understand what are the other instances which indicate the decline in the productivity of both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, what are the reasons and how we can enhance or increase the productivity of the parliament. Any discussion on productivity of parliament can never be complete without this graph. On the y-axis you have number of days. Yellow belongs to Lok Sabha and green belongs to Rajya Sabha, and so it shows that in the initial phases you can clearly see that Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha met on an average for around 160 to 120 days. By the time 2021 came, the average number of days on which they are meeting has reduced to around 80. So you can see that there is a clear-cut declining trend in the number of days in which Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha both are meeting. And this is just about quantity. This is just about the number of days they are meeting. If you look at the quality, the time spent on debate on legislation in 2021, Lok Sabha has worked for only 236 hours. Whereas the same figure for Rajya Sabha happened to be around 179 hours per year, which further comes out to be around 15 to 20 hours per month of work. And so this is a clear-cut case or cause of concern for all of us. Now before we go on and understand what are the other instances which lead us to believe that the productivity of parliament has declined, we should first at the very basic be understanding as to why Is it important for us to ensure productivity of the parliament, or what are the functions of the parliament because of which higher productivity is needed, and if it is not being yielded, we are concerned. And if we talk about parliament and its role in our democracy, and the first and foremost role that it plays is the accountability of the executive. Article 74 to the Constitution of India has enabled a parliamentary democracy in our country, which means that the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister, or in short, the elected executive, is accountable to the House of the People. And so that is one of the most important work that has been given to the parliament. And this role particularly has been given to the House of the People. Then the second important role of parliament in India is as a legislature, or as a house which enables the legislation or lawmaking. And so parliament is expected to examine all legislative proposals in detail, understand their nuances and implications of the provision, and decide on the appropriate way forward. Then there is another very important role which has been given to the parliament, and that is about providing representation to the people. It works as a representative body. While Lok Sabha represents common people, Rajya Sabha represents the interests of the states. And that is the reason why Lok Sabha is known as House of the People and Rajya Sabha is known as Council of States. Now, if Parliament is not meeting regularly, then definitely it is compromising on the three main functions which have been given to it, which is about enforcing collective accountability on executive, proper lawmaking, and providing representation to the people and states. Now, the obvious question is that whenever you observe a trend, there has to be a reason behind it. And so, what is the reason, and what are the indicators behind declining trend of parliamentary productivity? How do we know, apart from these hours of meeting and days of meeting, how do we know that parliamentary productivity is indeed declining? And we know that because of a lot of instances which clearly show this trend. For example, there is absolute absence of bill scrutiny. For example, during the budget session, 13 bills were introduced in the House, and not even one of them was referred to a parliamentary committee for examination. And we can understand the consequences of not thinking through a bill properly. These bills, once become an act, govern the whole country, and if they are not properly investigated, researched, dissected, especially in a parliamentary committee, a lot of issues with the act will definitely arise. And the best example to showcase this is GNCTD Amendment Bill 2021. Then the next clear-cut demonstrator of declining parliamentary productivity is a lack of discussion of union budget, where ideally Lok Sabha should debate on each and every demand which has been tabled by or for each and every ministry. But in recent budget session, the government listed the budget of just 5 ministries for detailed discussion. And in essence, around 76% of the union budget was approved without any debate or discussion. Now you can understand that this defeats the whole mechanism which was created to enforce financial accountability on the government. Otherwise, the constitutional makers would have directly given the power to withdraw money to the government from the Consolidated Fund of India. But exactly for the same reason, government did not do it, because they wanted to have some kind of check over the government of India, so that each and every penny and each and every rupee which goes out of the consolidated fund is approved by the Lok Sabha. Then the third important aspect of lawmaking and debating is the role played by parliamentary committees. And if you have gone through even the basics of the book on polity, you might have realized that these parliamentary committees are very, very important part of the legislative work. Because the parliament as a body is so vast and it's so diverse that it is simply not possible for it to take up each and every legislative matter, and hence there are a lot of parliamentary committees which have been enacted or created to take care of matters in detail. And that is why there are parliamentary committees which exist throughout the year, and they develop a specialization on various topics of governance and lawmaking. And it's obviously a good idea to first send the draft to the respective parliamentary committees, give them time to work upon them, and then wait for their feedback. And on the basis of the feedback provided by the parliamentary committees, which have distribution which is quite similar and representation which is quite similar to the parliament, wait for their feedback and their report. And once their reports are tabled on the floor of the house, then the discussion is well informed. But the number of bills referred to committee has dipped sharply to just 1/3 in 16th Lok Sabha and 10% in 17th Lok Sabha. And so the obvious question is, why the parliamentary productivity is declining? See, ideally, constitution provides mechanism so that parliament can control executive, but it is other way around. Actually, if a party commands or a coalition commands majority in the lower house, then actually they are the one who are driving or running the agenda of the house. And so when the government commands absolute majority, there is nothing really to keep the government into check or into account. And so when unresponsive government become insensitive to the demands of the opposition members, it leaves with no other option for the opposition members to resort to frequent disruptions, because all the tools or the mechanisms which are provided, like adjournment motion, like no confidence motion, like any other kind of motion, they required at least the majority of the members of the house present and voting to be enabled or to be activated. Because of which there is a dissatisfaction among members of parliament because of inadequate time for airing their grievances. Then all of this is happening because the sitting hours and all other legislative agenda of either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha are neither fixed by the house themselves nor have been fixed by the constitution, but rather they are driven by the government. And so the intention of the government is reflected in the way parliament is functioning. Then finally, there is an absence of prompt action against disrupting MPs. So how to increase the productivity? What are the steps that we can suggest in order to increase the productivity of the parliament? Because we have understood that it's of vital importance for our overall democratic framework. So the first and foremost, no one can deny that there is a need to increase the number of the sittings. And in this regard, National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution had recommended that the minimum number of sittings for Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha should be fixed at 120. That should be the constitutional obligation. Of course, you cannot make them work, but at least you can force them to come to the office and sit for at least 120 days. That might lead to some improvement. Then no one can deny the fact that there is dearth of research support to the members. Although legislative staff is provided to the parliamentary committees, but there is a need for us to provide such kind of a support to each and every member, because we have to understand that these members come from all kind of background. Some of them might not be educated, some of them might not have experience in legislative work, and so we need to provide them with research support. People who qualify in examination just like UPSC and become the support staff to the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha and allocated to each and every member, so that whenever a member asks them to conduct a research on a particular topic, they are able to come up with a substantive report which then can be utilized by the members to table his or her views in the house. Then there is a need for making it mandatory for each and every bill to be sent to the particular committee, requiring that all bills and budgets will be definitely examined by a particular committee, will definitely have a lot of improvement in the amount and the quality of the debate in the lower as well as in the upper house. At the same time, there is a need for regular monitoring through an institutional mechanism. And then finally, there needs to be an active opposition. Members must question, object, and suggest alternative course of action on each and every legislative matter suggested by the government. And this is what is followed in UK in the form of shadow cabinet, where corresponding to each and every executive, each and every minister, there is a shadow minister from the opposition who comes up with the alternative mechanism for every field. just to show that how better they could be if they were provided with an opportunity to handle the governance by the people. The next article which we have taken up has appeared on page number 6. We need to protect whistleblowers. The article has been written by former judge of the Supreme Court of India, Justice Mother B. Lokur. Justice says that ignoring the fact that right to information users are facing death for keeping democracy alive is a threat to democracy itself. In this particular article, the author highlights various instances where how RTI activists are either being killed, arrested, or being threatened by the state, contractor, private sector individuals. These RTI activists have filed a lot of right to information requests in public distribution system, functioning of Manrega, distribution of funds to Anganwadi centers, housing schemes, and illegal operations of various health schemes. And so in this regard, this whistleblowing has again come back into the news. Whistleblowing has always been an important aspect of governance, because if you look at the GS paper 2, the syllabus says important aspects of governance, transparency and accountability. Now there are various institutional mechanisms to enforce and induce transparency. Right to information is one of them, but unless and until we enable people who are a part of the system of public as well as private companies, part of the system of governance, unless and until they are provided protection, so that if they know something wrong about a particular aspect, if they know about certain scandals, corruptions, fraud, and if they decide to come in open in public with revelations, they should be protected. And we have seen the instances where such whistleblowers, people who have gone public with such disclosures, have either been killed or arrested, or they have been threatened. And so in this regard, Parliament enacted Whistleblowers Protection Act 2011. So we already have a legislative framework to protect whistleblowers, but there are a lot of issues with the bill as well. And so we are going to take up all these aspects in the discussion. So starting with actually what is the process of whistleblowing and why is it so important? You see, in any organization, be it private or public, usually the people who are inside that organization generally have access to best of the information about activities of a particular organization, what is happening inside, what are the policies of the companies or the government, how the funds are being utilized, how different mechanisms are being enforced within and outside of that organization. And hence, if there is something wrong going on with respect to all these matters, they should be the people who should come out in public interest, and those people become whistleblowers. So they are persons, most likely and usually employees, who expose information about any activity within that particular organization which is deemed to be either illegal, immoral, unsafe, fraud, or abuse of taxpayers' money. So all these terms are generally accepted to be as whistleblowing. And now we can understand the importance of whistleblowing, because it directly ensures the transparency and accountability of public as well as private institutions. So unless and until Edward Snowden came out in public and talked about what he experienced as a private contractor to the top spy agency of USA, the world did not have any idea about the level of surveillance which was going on. But you can clearly see that he has not been able to step on American soil, his own country, in last 10 years. And that is why it is very, very important to protect whistleblowers. Because more often than not, when whistleblowers go public, they're either forced to leave the organization, or even if they remain in a particular organization, there is a grave loss of credibility of their career. Obviously, their life and family is threatened, and there is a threat of physical and psychological isolation for them. And no topic in ethics can go without case studies or examples. And two famous examples I would like to quote over here is one of Satyendra Dubey, an IIT Kanpur graduate in his mid-30s who was supervising construction of Golden Quadrilateral project in the Kodarma division of Jharkhand. He had a reputation of being an honest and upright officer. He was promoted as a project director and was likely to be posted there. Dubey exposed mishandling of funds by 3 of his engineers, which led to the suspension of the contractor. A huge loss of the contractor because the contract was taken away from him. And he had written to the National Highway Authority of India and to the Prime Minister's office describing the financial irregularities in the project. What happened? Dubey was shot dead in early hours of November 26, 2003, barely a month after he had written that letter. And he had written that letter directly to PMO and did not discuss anything about anyone else, and so his name was leaked directly from there. The second case or incident worth remembering is that of Manjunath Shananmugam, an IIM graduate and a sales manager of Indian Oil Corporation. And his case again shocked the country because he was killed for exposing the racket of adulteration of petrol pumps and the involvement of the mafia in Uttar Pradesh. So you can clearly see that because of the consequences that whistleblowers have to bear, it is very, very important to protect them. Because if we do not protect them, the whistleblowers will not come out in open, and that means a lot of loss of transparency to our governance system. So how the protection mechanism works in our country when someone blows a whistle. And so in 2011, Parliament passed a Watershed Act, Whistleblowers Protection Act 2011, which provided protection from harassment. The persons who choose to make disclosure of corruption, willful misuse of power, or arbitrary use of discretion of any of the powers given to them, they will be provided with protection. What are the protections? First and foremost, any person who negligently reveals the identity of the complainant will be punished. And so, the Act provides for keeping the identity of the whistleblower secure. Then comes the broad definition of whistleblower. It goes beyond government officials and includes any other person or non-governmental organization. So it includes wide definition of whistleblowing. Then we know that a lot of government information cannot be revealed in public because of Official Secrets Act 1923. But the Act says the person who chooses to make a public interest disclosure to a competent authority, even if they are prohibited under Official Secrets Act, will be allowed and there will be no penalty on it. Then it provided for appeal mechanism as well. Any person aggrieved by any order of the competent authority may prefer an appeal to the High Court within a period of 60 days from the date of an order. But at the same time, it does not apply to armed forces of the union. So any information related to armed forces cannot be revealed by any person, and no protection shall be given to him or her under the Whistleblower Protection Act. But then there are minor provisions in the other act as well. For example, Companies Act 2013 makes it mandatory for entities listed on the stock exchange to set up an audit committee to investigate whistleblower complaints, because the private sector faces a lot of problems with respect to whistleblowing, and there is a need for protection of whistleblower explicitly working for private companies. Then SEBI has come up with prohibition of insider trading regulation, or SEBI PIT, where the SEBI rewards whistleblowers and other informants for sharing information about insider trading. So what are the issues with the current mechanism to protect the whistleblowers? And first and foremost issue is that the Act, Whistleblower Protection Act 2011, is still not operational. It has been notified, but no mechanism has been created to operationalize it. So there is no authority, no appeal mechanism, there is no rules related to this act as to how the whistleblowers are going to be protected. Although this act was passed in 2011, it has been more than 11 years that we are waiting for a proper rule and regulation guidelines as to how to utilize this act. When the government was asked about why this act is still not operational, they said that amendment has been carried out. An amendment bill was tabled in the parliament in 2015, which was passed by the Lok Sabha, but it got stuck in Rajya Sabha. Government says that the act cannot be implemented in the way it was passed in 2011, and there is a serious need for modification. And unless and until the bill is modified, and unless and until the act is modified, it cannot be implemented. So what are the modifications which were tabled by the government? So the Act provided a mechanism for receiving and inquiring into public interest disclosures against the acts of course, corruption, willful misuse of power or discretion. But the bill prohibits the reporting, prohibits the disclosure if it falls under any of the 10 categories of information mentioned as you can see on the screen. It could be about economic, scientific, interests of security of India, cabinet proceedings, intellectual property, and so all such kinds are out of the purview if the bill is passed. And that was a big letdown in the era of transparency. Because if you look at it, if a company is working in research and development of any of the vaccines, and if they plagiarize some of the content which is then revealed in the public interest by a whistleblower, it will be exempted and no action will be taken against the company. And in fact, whistleblower might be held responsible for leaking out that information. So this is not done. Then the Act permitted disclosures that were prohibited under Official Secrets Act. Then the Act disallows disclosures which are covered under Official Secrets Act. So Official Secrets Act is the legislation which protects all the government secrets. The problem is that the government functionaries mark all the files as official secrets and then it cannot be revealed to the public, and especially not by a whistleblower, but some of it can be revealed only through process adopted under Right to Information Act. So the Whistleblowers Act 2011 provided overriding powers to the whistleblowers over Official Secrets Act, but the amendment bill is undoing the good which was done by the Act 2011. The next article which we have taken up has again appeared on page number 1. Teach law, medicine in regional languages, says Union Home Minister Amit Shah. Now this article in terms of its utility is not that important because it's a statement made by Union Home Minister, but from the perspective of prelims examination, it is extremely important for us to understand all the perspectives related to the language in the Constitution of India. Language indeed has been one of the most vexatious issue of Indian federalism. It has not only created trouble between the center and the states, but its manifestations are also felt in interstate relations. And hence in this regard, it becomes important for us to first understand what are the provisions of the Constitution dealing with the matter of language. What Constitution says with respect to the language of the Union, language of the states, how states are going to communicate among each other. Because most states have language which is very, very different from its neighboring states. So we will start by first understanding the constitutional provisions with respect to language of the Union, language of the judiciary, regional languages and special directives given in the Constitution, and then we will finally understand the claim of the author. So the matters dealing with languages have been mentioned in part 17 of the Constitution of India, which is titled as Official Languages. And there are 4 chapters. Chapter 1 dealing with language of the Union. Chapter 2 dealing with regional languages or official languages of the state. Language 3 dealing with the language of the Supreme Court and the High Courts, which is the languages of the higher judiciary. And Chapter 4 dealing with special directives. Now since the language of the Constitution is very difficult to understand, we will directly look into the short notes which we have prepared for you of all these 4 chapters, and we will try to understand the main provisions in each one of these chapters. Starting with the language of the Union. Now if someone asks you what is the official language of Indian Union, and that is Hindi written in Devanagari script is to be the official language of the Union, and this is given in the Constitution of India. But the form of numerals to be used for the official purposes of the Union has to be the international form of Indian numerals and not the one which are written in Devanagari scripts. Now this is confusing because most of the communications given out by the central government are in English language, and hence the first query which should come into your mind is that how come is it possible when the Constitution itself has made Hindi as official language of Indian Union? And that is because of another article which mandates that for a period of 15 years from the commencement of Constitution, that means the Constitution's commencement started in 1950. So just after the commencement of the Constitution and until 15 years from there on, the English language would continue to be used for all the official purposes of the Union for which it was being used before 1950. Since the end date for the English to be used as official language was written, why is still all the communication is in English? And that is because of the next article, which says that even after 15 years, Parliament may provide for the continued use of English language for the specified purposes. So first, Constitution made sure that in order to maintain continuity, English is used for 15 years, and then it gave the power to the Parliament to allow the continuance of English even after 15 years. And hence, accordingly, Parliament enacted Official Languages Act 1963. The Act provided for continued use of English in addition to Hindi for all official purposes of the Union and also for the transaction of business in Parliament. Now you can understand that as far as the language of the Union is concerned, it is governed by both Constitution as well as legislation enacted by the Parliament. So these are the two sources which ultimately determine the language of the Union. What about the language of the states or regional languages? So there is a big difference between the two. And that is that the Constitution does not specify official languages of the states as it did in the case of Union. And of course it makes sense, keeping in view the diversity of India, this flexibility was provided. And just like in the case of center, the power was given to Parliament, in case of states, the power was given to legislature. Constitution says that legislature of a state may adopt any one or more of the languages in use in a state or Hindi as the official language of a particular state. So utilizing the provisions of this particular article, most of the states have adopted the major regional language as their own official language. For example, Andhra Pradesh has adopted Telugu, Kerala, Malayalam, Assam, Assamese, Odisha, Odia, and various states in the north, for example, Himachal Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Haryana and Rajasthan have adopted Hindi. They were able to do that simply because the Constitution says that legislature of a state may adopt any one or more of the languages in use in a state as their own official language. Now the matter doesn't end there, because a state needs to talk to two entities, another states and center. And for this linkage, the Constitution of India says that the official language of the Union would remain the link language for communication as far as interstate communication is concerned and the communication with the center is concerned. But there is an exception over here. If two or more states agree to use Hindi for communicating among each other, they can agree to do so, and that will be held totally legal. For example, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Bihar have entered into such an agreement, and any official communication among these four states is done in Hindi. So that provision has also been given in the Constitution. Then another very important clause of regional languages section of Constitution is the directives given by the President. So when a President is satisfied that a substantial proportion of the population of a state desires the use of any language spoken by them to be recognized by that particular state, then the President may direct that such language shall also be officially recognized in that particular state. So a big discretion and a power has been entrusted with the President, and that has been done to protect the linguistic interests of minorities in a particular state. It was felt that a language spoken by a very small section of people in a state may never be protected and recognized as official language, and hence that protection can be enabled directly from the central government through President, which can order a particular language being spoken in a particular state to be recognized as an official language of that particular state. So far we have done language of the Union and regional languages. But what about the judiciary? Does Constitution says anything about the language to be used in the conduct of the business of the higher judiciary? Yes, Constitution makes very important and significant provisions with respect to language to be used by the judiciary. And first and foremost is that until Parliament provides otherwise, two things are to be in English language only. Constitution says that all proceedings in Supreme Court and High Court must be conducted in English only, and the authoritative text of all the bills, acts, ordinances, orders, rules and regulations, both for central as well as state governments and legislature and parliament, shall be in English only. What does authoritative text means? Now we know that bills and acts, ordinance, orders, rules, regulations and even judgments are dependent on the language and their interpretation. And most of the legal trouble originates because of the language and the words or the grammar used in that particular language. So authoritative text is recognized or accepted as being true or reliable. And if there is any kind of confusion with respect to implementation of an order or act or any other regulation, then the authoritative text and the meaning which is arrived at by reading of that particular text shall be considered as supreme, and hence authoritative text has a big importance in law. The Constitution also says until Parliament provides otherwise. So you should keep this important fact in mind, that Parliament can change both these provisions. So the power has been given by the Constitution to the Parliament to change the language which will be used in the proceedings of Supreme Court and High Court, and to also change the language in which authoritative texts of these things shall be published. So obviously now the question arises that since all the people in our country are not well versed in English language, and so is it not violation of natural justice that all the justice shall be carried out in a particular language which is alien to Indian people? And that is why the Constitution has made a provision in which the governor of a state, with previous consent of the president, can authorize the use of Hindi or any other official language of the state in the proceedings in the High Court of the state. So if the governor feels that in Karnataka it is important for people to plea in Kannada, then governor, after taking consent from president, allow that to happen. But Constitution specifically mentions that this provision will not be applicable to judgments, decrees and orders. So all these three things will continue to remain in English or any other language which the Parliament can provide for, but the governor can allow the proceedings in the High Court to happen in any other language. So far we have seen three things: language of the Union, regional languages and language of the judiciary. Let's now understand the special directives given in the Constitution. So there are four provisions which are categorized under special directives. They are special orders or duties entrusted by the Constitution on Indian executives. So the first is language to be used in representation for redressal of the grievances. Every aggrieved person has the right to submit a representation for the redress of any grievance to any officer or authority of the Union or authority of any state in any language used in the Union or in the state, as the case may be. So if a person has to complain or has a problem, then that complaint can be written in any language used in the state if the complaint is against state officials or machinery. So through this provision, the Constitution has made sure that all those people who do not know the official languages of the Union or the state are not devoid of the right to complain. And hence it is not important for them to use any of the official languages. This means that a representation cannot be rejected on the ground that it is not in the official language. Then Constitution also provides for facilities for instruction in mother tongue. Every state and a local authority in the state should provide adequate facilities for instruction in mother tongue at the primary stage of education to children belonging to linguistic minority groups. And President has been empowered to issue necessary directions for this purpose. Then in order to safeguard various kinds of rights given to linguistic minorities in our country, the Constitution makes the provision of appointment of special officer for linguistic minorities. The President should appoint a special officer for linguistic minorities to investigate all matters relating to the constitutional safeguards for linguistic minorities and report to him. Constitution also makes provisions for placing of this report on the table of the Parliament. And then finally, the Constitution imposes a duty upon the centre to promote the spread and development of Hindi language. The Constitution uses a very unique term, lingua franca, or a language that is adopted as a common language, or also a bridge language or a common language, which is a language which is used to communicate among two sets of people who do not know each other's mother tongue. So for example, communication between two sets of people speaking language A and language C. And lingua franca is the one which enables the communication for the simple reason that it is understood by both of them. And Constitution envisages the development of Hindi in our country in such a way that eventually it becomes lingua franca, or the bridge language of Indian Union, understood and spoken by everyone. And that is one of the biggest problems and the challenges to the India's federal structure as well. And we shall not go into those details. That is a discussion for another time, because now it's time to focus on what has been discussed in today's editorial. So as we all know that recently the government came up with notification on EIA, or Environment Impact Assessment, in English and in Hindi. And hence then a lot of people went to court, and two of the high courts have asked the government to publish the notification in all 22 languages which are mentioned in 8th schedule to the Constitution of our India. But the government of India has declined to do so, and the reasons given by the government are twofold. First is that the government of India has said that it is not required by the law to publish these notifications in 22 languages mentioned in the 8th schedule. We have seen that Official Languages Act 1963 requires the publication of law only in English and Hindi, and hence it leads to the exclusion of non-English and non-Hindi people. And the second reason given by the government is that if they start to translate one particular notification in 22 languages, they will have to take care of so many definitions, languages, and they will have to issue a lot of clarifications in order to reduce the confusions which shall arrive due to the changes in the meaning which will occur. For example, when the translation from English to Telugu will take place, because not all languages contain the words which communicate the same meaning, and hence it leads to a lot of problems. So these are the two reasons which have been given by the central government while opposing the orders issued by the High Court. But the author says that there are two very strong reasons why government should actually try to publish almost all the acts, notifications and various other publications in all the languages mentioned in the 8th schedule of our Constitution. And the first is that the author says there is an act known by the name of Authoritative Texts Central Laws Act 1973, which provides not only for the translation of various kinds of publication of the central government, but it also empowers the government to recognize the authoritative translation of all central laws into 8 schedule languages. And the provisions of this particular act are also applicable to rules and regulations and notifications, just like environment impact assessment. So the author says that the argument of the government does not hold any ground, because there will be no confusion if the government uses the powers given in the Authoritative Text Central Laws Act 1973, through which the government can actually recognize authoritative translations which will not lead to any kind of confusion which the government is saying will occur. And the second important reason why author wants the publication of all these rules, regulations and acts into a lot of languages is because he wants the laws to be inclusive. He wants the laws to be understood by the people. And hence he talks about the translation as a legal right, because it is reasonable to argue that citizens are not bound by the laws that are not made available to them in their own language. Supreme Court has also said various times that citizens are not bound by the laws which have not been published and publicized. And publication or advertisement of a notification in only English or Hindi means that it is practically not published for people who speak any other language except Hindi or English. And hence the author says that Indians should not be expected to be bound by central laws unless Parliament makes laws in their own languages. So overall, this particular discussion has a lot to offer from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination. For prelims, you need to keep in mind the provision of the Constitution, and for mains, along with these provisions, you also need to keep in mind why is it important that the laws be published in as many languages as possible. Next article again appears on page number 1. EPC core sector output expands by 12.7% appears on page number 1. India's 8 core sectors output growth moderated to 12.7% in June from 18.1% in May, with all sectors except crude oil registering an uptick in production. Now the observations made in this particular article is not that important because first of all, this data come month on month basis, and hence UPSC is not going to ask you about the trends of a particular month. But what UPSC is going to ask, and what it has asked in the past, is about the basics of these indices. And that is what we are going to cover in this particular discussion. Since a lot of our viewers are new and they have just started the preparation, it is always a good idea to revisit the basic concepts, as these have been covered in past 6 to 9 months. So all those viewers who have watched these basic concepts may decide to skip this discussion. But in this session, we are going to talk about what index of industrial production is all about. What does it actually mean when we say an index or an item basket? Which is the body which releases it? How are various kinds of products categorized in IIP? Then we will understand the significance of IIP, and then finally we will talk about the 8 core industries and their individual contribution to the index of 8 core industries. So in 2015, UPSC had asked in the index of 8 core industries, which one of the following is given the highest weight? And the right answer is electricity generation has the highest weight in 8 core industries indices. We'll see how. Then in 2012, UPSC had asked in India, in the overall index of industrial production, the indices of 8 core industries have combined weight of 37.9%. Which of the following are among those 8 core industries? So there are 8 core industries. You are expected to recall each one of them. And if you start reading from the top, cement, fertilizer, natural gas and refinery products, all these 4 are included in the 8 core industries, whereas textile finds no place in that list. And hence the right answer will be C, 1, 2, 3 and 4 only. So you can see that direct questions come from index of 8 core industries as well as index of industrial production. And hence we will start by understanding the basics of the index. Now, index of industrial production or IIP is an index used to track the performance of industrial sector in the economy. So the first question which should arise is that what is an index? Now, an index is a composite number, an absolute number free of any units of measurement. So for example, when you see indices like CPI or IIP or WPI, they don't have any number. They are usually expressed in terms of percentage with reference to a previous period. So for example, an index in 2011 can be assigned a number of 100. And if that grows to 150 in 2020, we say that it has grown by 50%. So this index is used to track the performance of industrial sector. But the question arises that if we consider the industrial sector of our country, it is so vast, it is geographically so scattered, and most of it is in informal sector. How do we make sure that each and every economic activity of manufacturing, mining, production is taken into account and is measured? How do we make sure that? And now that is where the concept of item basket comes into play. Because it is generally not practicable to include all the economic activities that contribute to industrial production. Because data for some of the activities may not be readily and economically available, and even it might not be feasible to gather that data. And hence, the statisticians have taken the help of item basket, which means a representative basket of items selected by applying judgment and on the basis of their relative importance for inclusion in the compilation of the index. Don't worry, I will simplify it. So for example, these dots, if they represent all the industrial activities going on in our country, and we know that it is not possible to keep a track of all of them, what we will do is that we will try to find out that which one among them contribute most to India's industrial production. And let's say after the survey, it has been found that the red dots are the ones which are most prominent. And it was found out that other industrial production were somewhat related to these red ones. So if red ones were found to have increased production, the blue ones also had increased production, and also the vice versa. Since we have to collect the data on industrial activity every month, it would make our lives very easy if we just map these red industrial activity and apply the same to all other. So this selection of industrial activity for calculation of index is known as item basket. So you should keep one thing in mind, that whenever you see index written on something, you should know that it is not tracking everything. So for example, if there is CPI written somewhere, which means it is a price index, which doesn't mean that it is tracking the price of each and every object in our country. It is just keeping a track of a basket of objects, and it is assuming that if these items in the basket are showing inflation, rest other will show inflation as well, just like index of industrial production. Now, once these objects are chosen to keep track of, they are assigned relative weights. For example, few of the activities dominate over others, and hence we need to assign greater importance to their data. So we'll not go into the details of how that is done because that will take us into the domain of statistics. But it is important from the perspective of prelims examination to understand how the indices system work. So let's say we are tracking coal sector. So obviously if the production of the coal sector is increasing, that means that demand of coal is also increasing, which is a very, very positive indicator of economic and industrial growth. So let's say in 2011, we had a production of X metric ton for the whole month, and we allocated that to an amount of 100. Then in 2020, due to coronavirus impact, we are producing X by 2 metric ton of coal, which means that our production has gone down by 50%. And hence, if the index was 100, the current index would be 50. And similarly, if it had increased to 150, the production would be 1.5x. So this is how a calculation is done to calculate the index every month by an organization known by the name of Central Statistical Office, or CSO. Now for the calculation of basket, the products in the economy, especially the industrial products, are divided into various kinds of groups. But as we know that there are various ways of dividing them into groups as well. For example, one of them is sectoral classification, where the industrial production for the purpose of IIP is divided into 3 sectors: manufacturing, mining and electricity. And highest weightage in this category is given to manufacturing sector. Then there is another classification as well, which is use-based classification. The definition to each one of them can be found in the PDF of the DNS discussion today. But just to give you a brief idea, primary goods are such goods which are directly obtained from natural sources and used for the purpose of further processing and consumption. For example, ores, minerals and electricity. Similarly, capital goods are those goods which enhance the production capacity, for example, investment in plants and machineries, boilers, gas compressors, engines, etc. Then we have infrastructure or construction goods. Then we have consumer durables and consumer non-durables. So as the name suggests, consumer durables would be those which have a long lifetime. For example, pressure cooker, air conditioners, tiles. And non-durables would be typically those consumption items like oil, toned and skimmed milk, which will have a very, very small shelf life and which can't be preserved for a long time. So this is it as far as the index basics is concerned. But the question arises that what is the significance of IIP? Now first and foremost is that IIP provides a single representative figure to measure the general level of industrial activity in the country, and that too on the monthly basis. Now it is not difficult to think that comparison of economic performance over time is a key factor in economic analysis, and it is also a fundamental requirement for policy making, and hence important decision making bodies of our country, for example Finance Ministry and Reserve Bank of India, both rely heavily on data of IIP. Not just the government but also the private sector, especially the analyst community as well as private companies seeking investment, they anxiously wait for IIP data to make their important investment decisions. Apart from that, compilation of gross value added of the manufacturing sector is done on the basis of data of IIP. And also, IIP is used for the projection of advanced estimates of GDP for the next year, which is again very important for making projections and future forecast of revenues of the government. Now we move on to the 8 core industries. And as you have seen in the question, yes, it is important to memorize all of them, which are coal, crude oil, natural gas, refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement, and electricity. And it is also important to keep in mind their individual weights. And if you see, the highest weightage is given to refinery products. But the question of the past year which we solved had the right answer of electricity, because the refinery products was not there in the option. So it is important to memorize these order in order to be able to walk into the examination hall confidently. So the facts are, DIPP releases the data, whereas the data for IIP is released by CSO, and the name of these sectors as well as their contributions. Modi unveils India's first bullion exchange appears on business page. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched India International Bullion Exchange, or IIBX, a first in the country, and NSE IFSC SGX Connect at Gandhinagar's Gift City yesterday. Now it is important for us to understand why this bullion exchange has been established, and there are 4 important reasons because of which India had to come up with such an initiative. You have to understand that despite being the second largest importer of gold in the world, with a demand of nearly 1,000 tons, India lacks many key elements of the golden ecosystem. First and foremost, the market in India is fragmented and there is no organized market for trading of gold in India. India, despite being the largest importer and consumer of gold, is a price taker rather than a price setter. So even though India is one of the major importers, India is unable to dictate prices of the gold in the international market. Then, just like all other sectors, India is plagued by poor infrastructure in terms of quality storage and vault facilities. And currently, not everyone and anyone can import gold from foreign countries. RBI nominates banks and agencies to import gold, and then that gold is supplied to traders and jewelers. So, India International Bullion Exchange was announced in the Union Budget. The exchange will not only facilitate trading of gold but would also set up necessary infrastructures to store physical gold and silver. It would have bullion exchange, bullion clearing corporation, and bullion depository. Qualified jewelers and nominated banks and agencies will be its participants. It will allow eligible qualified jewelers as nominated and notified by International Financial Services Centers Authority to directly import gold through IIBX, and it will enable trading of bullion through bullion depository receipts, or BDRs, issued in electronic form by Bullion Depository. It will be regulated through International Financial Services Centers Authority Regulation 2020, notified by IFCA. So from the perspective of prelims examination, it is quite important.